Hello. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about, a common perpetuated myth, in my opinion. Obviously, there are those who will disagree with me. Uh, there are a lot of people out there who, when you ask them about, what size saltwater tank should I get for my first tank, the standard response is the bigger the better. Um, and while it's true that there are some distinct advantages to having, a tank as big as you can go on your first saltwater tank, there are also some distinct disadvantages once you get into tanks of a certain size range. When you're talking about tanks of over 55 gallons, you're having to add more equipment to them because, generally speaking, it's recommended that you run a sump on a setup like that. So it requires you to have a sump tank. It requires you to have, protein skimmer, return pump, and if you're looking to keep it as efficient and simple as possible, it means that you also need to get a pre-drilled tank with an overflow. There are those people who add the overflow boxes, which have a tendency to jam with their siphons, so to speak. They can get clogged, and so they can be a problem, and of course, an additional cost. So, in addition to that, larger tanks are going to require more equipment maintenance. You've got more glass that needs to, be cleaned and scrubbed, as it were, on a fairly regular basis. So as such, when I hear people saying, "Oh, it's just much easier to care for a really big saltwater tank," well, yes and no. And I'll kind of point out the advantages and disadvantages because, in my opinion, it doesn't matter what size of a saltwater tank you get. Everything in the hobby is a compromise. Everything. Um, and so it just depends on what suits you. The other issues with larger saltwater tanks are, quite frankly, just the astronomical startup costs. If you're looking to, just kind of try out the hobby or whatever, if you're getting a large tank, you're talking about a very significant investment in cost. Um, if you're in the 125 gallon or larger range, well, with very rare exceptions, even with used equipment, I would say you better plan on about a $1,500 to $2,000 expenditure. Yeah, it is that expensive. By the time you factor in the cost of the tank, the sump, the plumbing, the skimmer, the return pump, the sand bed, the live rock, the power heads, the lighting. There's a big one, particularly if you're wanting corals. The lighting on a tank that's 6 feet long is pretty pricey. Um, so, anyways, I do strongly recommend that people take these things into consideration before they pick up their first saltwater tank. Um, as mentioned, in addition, the cleaning regimen and maintenance, there's more surface area of the tank to clean, scrubbing algae off the glass and that sort of thing. Um, and even the best cleanup crew that's super efficient will still require you about on a weekly or once every 2 weeks, require you to do at least some form of glass cleaning. So now the advantages, obviously, of starting with a much larger saltwater tank are that its water parameters are very stable. Um, it's a lot easier for you to maintain salinity levels, pH, ammonia, nitrites, nitrates. If you accidentally overfeed, they're a lot more forgiving. Um, just because there's a lot more water displacement there, and of course because you have enough biological filtration and mechanical filtration that it'll handle it okay. If you make the occasional mistake with stuff. But but anyway, so as I said, there are advantages and disadvantages to having larger tanks. Now, on the flip side of that, I see a lot of people come in. They say, "Oh, by the way, I've got a spare, 5 to 10 gallon tank, or maybe a 15 gallon or something like that." And I'm looking to start up my first saltwater tank, and it's like, well, realistically, those tanks are best left for experienced people, in my opinion, because of the fact that they are they can change very rapidly, literally in the blink of an eye. If you're talking a tank of 10 gallons or less, because of the fact that there is so little water displacement there, that even overfeeding a little bit can be catastrophic in a tank of that size. So there's a lot more maintenance with it, whereas in a larger tank, maybe once a week, or I guess you could push it to every couple of weeks for testing the ammonia, nitrites, nitrates, pH, and that sort of thing. With a small tank like that, a nano or pico tank, depending on how small you're going, you're talking about, every 2 or 3 days you're having to check the water parameters on all those things. So you're going to be doing a lot more water testing. Your water, your salinity levels in your tank are going to require a lot more monitoring. With tanks of less than 10 gallons, don't be surprised if you're having to top up your water on a daily basis. It's something where you're going to have to follow and monitor it, just on a regular basis and on a daily basis. It's something that can get out of control very quickly in a tank of that size. The other issue that not a lot of people recognize or acknowledge is that smaller tanks are significantly more likely to have aggression issues with fish, because they're more likely to feel cramped and territorial. So even generally peaceful fish can turn aggressive or nasty in a tank of that size. To put this in perspective, for less than a year, I had a 36-gallon bow front, which I added, multiple fish to over the year, and I had to remove an aggressive dwarf angel, a flame angel. I had to remove a redhead salon fairy wrasse, and I had to remove a snowflake ocellaris clownfish. So I had 3 fish there I had to remove. Conversely, when I upgraded my 90-gallon, the only fish I've ever had to remove in the last year that I've owned it is a yellow tang. So, as such, you can see that even there, with a 36-gallon bow front, that the odds are significantly higher in me having, territorial or aggression issues with fish. And I mean, obviously, larger tanks are going to be less likely to have problems with stocking fish, and sometimes, you can go with fish of slightly more aggressive temperaments, getting some of those semi-aggressive fish in there in larger tanks. Or, obviously, if you decide to go with a more aggressive tank, you can just stock aggressive fish and getting bigger and larger fish. So that is another advantage of the larger tanks. The truth is that, when I hear, oh, the bigger the better, or some people say, oh, it doesn't really matter that much. Well, it does, and as I said, there are advantages and disadvantages to each size of tank. Realistically, though, for somebody who's just not sure if they want to really invest the time or effort into the hobby, generally what I recommend, as long as they're content with just having a few smaller fish, going with something like a 20-gallon long or 40 breeder, and then just doing a fish only with live rock setup to start off with, no corals, because it's a lot cheaper, it's significantly easier. The tanks will give you decent sized dimensions, and as long as you monitor it relatively frequently, but not with the extreme frequency of a pico or nano tank, They will generally stay relatively stable and be reasonably easy to maintain. So as I said, there are advantages and disadvantages with all size tanks. With the 20-gallon long and the 40 breeder, you can, if you want to, you can go without a sump. It's not a problem. You can go without a protein skimmer, provided you do weekly partial water changes and don't overfeed. And as such, that's generally kind of the route that I recommend going. And of course, the 20-gallon long fish only with live rock or 40 breeder, they can be set up for a few $100s instead of $1,500 to $2,000. So you can get into one, and that way you can figure out whether it's for you. And if you decide it's for you, you can always upgrade later, or just keep it and then get a bigger tank, whatever it is you decide to do. And so that's kind of, just in a nutshell, the kind of argument and debate over, what size tank I should get. Obviously, the bigger fish tanks give you much bigger fish, more stocking options, but, depending on what it is that you're looking for, if you're a person who's content with just a couple of clownfish, yeah, I mean, there's not really a whole lot of reason for you to go beyond a 20-gallon long tank. So, anyways, that's all I have, and thanks for watching.